Bonjour tout le monde. Ceux qui nous rejoignent à l'instant, bienvenue à GGEd. Puis ceux qui étaient là avant, ben, wow, on a eu droit à un beau keynote de Marc Petit. Ça me fait plaisir d'être avec vous pour le reste de la journée. On va animer, on va voir plein de beaux invités. Et je commence avec Marilyn Brunet, qui est directrice Impact dans les collectivités chez Centraide du Grand Montréal. Puis elle nous rappelle la mission de l'organisme aujourd'hui, puis pourquoi on fait des événements comme celui d'aujourd'hui. Marilyn?
Merci Andréane pour l'introduction. Hi everyone, thanks for having me this morning. Je tiens à vous remercier remercier le comité organisateur pour le temps qui a été mis dans la planification de ce bel événement. C'est vraiment incroyable. Je suis très heureuse d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui pour pouvoir vous en dire un petit peu plus sur l'impact des sommes amassées grâce à des événements comme celui-ci, puis qui vont être ensuite réinvestis dans les communautés. Peut-être commencer d'abord par vous situer un petit peu plus ce qui est Centraide du Grand Montréal. Pour ceux qui sont moins familiers peut-être avec l'organisation, on est un OBNL. On fait partie d'un mouvement, le grand mouvement des Centraides United Way Canada, ainsi que du réseau mondial des United Way. Donc, on a tous la même mission, c'est lutter contre la pauvreté et l'exclusion sociale. On travaille en étroite collaboration à Montréal auprès de 350 organismes et projets communautaires. Quand on parle du Grand Montréal, là, ça veut dire Laval, Montréal, Rive-Sud. Donc, ça nous permet de venir en aide à plus de 800 000 personnes par année. Dans le cadre de la conférence aujourd'hui, j'aimerais vous parler davantage des actions qui sont posées pour soutenir les femmes en situation de vulnérabilité dans le Grand Montréal. Présente 62 des personnes qui sont rejointes chaque année à travers nos différentes initiatives qu'on soutient. Donc, on parle environ de 420 000 femmes. Vous le savez, la situation des femmes en difficulté a fait beaucoup la manchette dans la dernière année et demie parce que c'est majoritairement les femmes qui ont dû faire face à l'adversité, à des nouvelles difficultés à cause des effets de la pandémie. Puis encore une fois, dans les médias ce matin, pour ceux qui sont au Québec, on doit entendre parler du 15e féminicide. Donc, ça continue. On voit que les inégalités se sont creusées puis continuent à se faire ressentir dans toutes les dimensions des vies des femmes. Quand on passe à l'emploi, la diminution du revenu, bien, parmi les 70 des personnes qui ont perdu leur emploi au Québec au début de la crise, parmi les personnes qui ont perdu leur emploi, 70 personnes étaient des femmes. Au niveau du risque sanitaire plus élevé, à cause des emplois occupés, c'est sûr que les femmes sont au premier front. Hein? C'est elles qui occupent majoritairement des postes comme dans les services de garde, dans les garderies. Elles sont préposées aux bénéficiaires, elles sont enseignantes, elles sont travailleuses communautaires. Donc, c'est elles qui sont à risque sanitaire plus élevé encore maintenant pendant la crise. C'est aussi souvent les femmes qui ont reçu le poids plus lourd de la charge familiale, donc la conciliation travail-famille, des soins aux proches aidants. Il y a moins de ressources disponibles en ce moment externes, donc souvent ce poids-là est retombé sur les femmes. Pour faire le lien avec la triste manchette que je vous parlais ce matin, on voit aussi une augmentation des situations de violence, d'exploitation. L'isolement qu'a créé la pandémie amène les femmes à être plus craintives, à aller vers les ressources disponibles. Puis, dans certaines situations, même, les femmes vont privilégier la stabilité, par exemple, de leurs enfants plutôt que leur propre sécurité. C'est sûr que ces enjeux-là nous préoccupent. Ils ont eu un impact significatif sur la santé mentale, notamment des femmes en difficulté dans la dernière année et demie. Alors, ça nous démontre encore plus l'importance d'appuyer des ressources qui ont l'expertise de leur venir en aide. À Centraide, on soutient financièrement depuis de nombreuses années des organismes qui interviennent spécifiquement auprès des femmes, notamment tout un réseau qu'on appelle les centres des femmes, qui sont mis en place, gérés par et pour ces femmes-là. Les activités privilégiées pour des centres, c'est sûr qu'elles vont se déployer différemment en fonction des quartiers qu'ils desservent, des populations qu'ils vont desservir, mais en général, là, elles visent toutes à améliorer la qualité de vie, les conditions de vie de ces femmes qui fréquentent les centres, à briser leur isolement, puis à favoriser aussi leur autonomie. Il y a aussi tout un volet de revendication, de sensibilisation à certains enjeux, puis la défense de droits des femmes. Il faut continuer certaines luttes, assurément. Donc, ça fait partie de la mission de ces organismes-là et on l'appuie avec grande fierté. En fonction des besoins qui sont multiples, on pense au processus migratoire de certaines femmes, de la violence, de diverses difficultés familiales reliées soit à la monoparentalité ou difficultés scolaires que peuvent avoir les enfants, l'offre des centres des femmes est tout aussi diversifiée. Puis, elle s'est encore plus diversifiée sous l'effet de la pandémie. Je vais vous en donner 2 exemples. Il y a le Centre des femmes de l'Ouest de l'île, donc c'est un organisme du réseau de Centraide qui est soutenu par Centraide, qui aide les femmes qui résident dans les quartiers de ce secteur de l'Ouest de l'île. Comme tous les organismes, le Centre de femmes il a dû rapidement s'adapter aux contraintes des mesures sanitaires qui ont été mises en place parce que c'était évident qu'il fallait continuer à épauler les femmes dont le nombre a augmenté. Puis les besoins se sont diversifiés dans la foulée de la pandémie. Depuis le début du printemps dernier, en effet, là, on comptait plus de femmes aînées et de jeunes femmes qui avaient un grand besoin de soutien et de répit à l'intérieur de ces ressources-là. Pour répondre aux demandes, pour suivre les interventions auprès de ces femmes-là en difficulté, c'est sûr que c'est un défi rapidement arrivé au sein des organismes. C'est le fossé numérique. Donc, les organismes n'avaient pas les capacités numériques pour mettre sur pied, réajuster leurs offres de services, ni les savoir-faire. Donc, Centraide, on a offert des sommes supplémentaires à ces organismes-là qui aura permis de prendre le virage numérique, puis d'offrir finalement une offre virtuelle. Donc, suite à cet appui-là, l'organisme est redevenu présent pour continuer à joindre les femmes dans leur quartier, les épauler, les écouter, proposer des activités pour les aider à plusieurs égards. Parmi ces activités-là, plus précisément, il y a eu des soutiens de groupe virtuels, donc des échanges entre femmes avec des intervenantes sur place. Il y a eu la tenue d'ateliers aussi sur différents sujets liés à l'impact de la pandémie pour pouvoir soutenir, notamment au niveau de la parentalité là, ou de stratégies d'enseignement, vu qu'au début, les enfants étaient, vous vous en souvenez bien, et certains d'entre vous ont eu à le gérer, assurément, ont eu à gérer l'école à distance. Puis il y a aussi, pour libérer un peu de temps aux jeunes mères, des activités virtuelles qui ont été offertes pour leurs enfants, par exemple comme l'heure du conte. Puis certaines mères nous ont témoigné que ces activités-là, c'était le seul moment de répit qu'ils avaient dans la semaine. Donc, vous dire à quel point c'était important. Pour s'assurer de joindre toutes les femmes, notamment celles qui n'avaient pas accès à un ordinateur ou qui ne possédaient pas les compétences pour en utiliser un, parce que c'est important de se rappeler qu'en milieu défavorisé, il y a un enjeu réel de littératie numérique. C'est comme dans le fond l'analphabétisme, mais version 2.0. Donc, des gens qui n'ont pas la capacité d'utiliser les outils technologiques. Donc, pour s'assurer de rejoindre toutes les femmes, il y a aussi des appels d'amitié, donc des appels téléphoniques qui ont été effectués. Un autre organisme incroyable, c'est le Centre des femmes d'ici et d'ailleurs, qui est soutenu par Centraide depuis de nombreuses années. Et il est localisé dans l'est du quartier Villeray, à proximité du quartier Saint-Michel. Donc, son emplacement permet à l'organisme de joindre les femmes des 2 secteurs. Comme c'est le cas pour le Centre des femmes de l'Ouest de l'île dont je viens de vous parler, avec la pandémie puis les mesures sanitaires, le centre a dû se réorganiser rapidement pour développer une offre virtuelle, notamment de vidéoconférences. Alors, ça a été possible grâce au soutien de Centraide à travers les fonds d'urgence. Puis, on a aussi fourni du matériel informatique pour ce faire, donc aussi les aider à prendre le virage numérique. Ce soutien-là, il a aussi permis de prêter des ordinateurs portables avec des connexions Internet intégrées aux femmes qui n'en avaient pas ou qui n'avaient pas les conditions adéquates, soit que leur ordinateur était déjà utilisé par un autre membre de la famille ou que le réseau Internet était trop faible. Puis, comme je disais tantôt, il y a vraiment un réel enjeu sur l'utilisation, les savoir-faire numériques. Alors, l'organisme savait que ça pouvait être un enjeu pour limiter la capacité des femmes d'accéder à ces activités-là. Il y a aussi des formations qui ont été offertes pour utiliser le matériel. Donc, c'était vraiment complet. Puis encore une fois, le virtuel pour certaines femmes, dans certains contextes, n'était pas possible. Alors, le centre a mis sur pied un service de marche-écoute le printemps dernier. Donc, les femmes pouvaient, au moment qui leur convenait, dans le lieu extérieur de leur choix où ils se sentaient en sécurité, prendre rendez-vous et rencontrer, en respect des règles sanitaires évidemment, une intervenante qui pouvait les accompagner, les référer vers les ressources d'aide appropriées. Cet accompagnement-là était offert en 4 langues, français, anglais, espagnol et arabe, pour encore une fois faciliter l'accessibilité à toutes les femmes à cette ressource-là. Cet exemple témoigne de la façon dont le centre a réinventé ses pratiques en privilégiant le travail de proximité. Puis ce travail-là de proximité, c'est vraiment la clé pour aller à la rencontre de toutes les femmes, même les plus isolées, là où elles se retrouvent. Donc, cette façon de faire-là a eu beaucoup de succès, puis ça a permis de rejoindre plus de femmes dans la dernière année dans cet organisme-là. Donc, c'est précieux dans le contexte où les besoins, comme on disait plus tôt, sont très grands. Je viens de vous présenter 2 exemples concrets d'organismes parmi les 350 que Centraide soutient chaque année. Des organismes qui, chaque jour, interviennent directement auprès des personnes les plus vulnérables de nos communautés, puis qui ont redoublé d'efforts et de créativité depuis le début de la pandémie pour y arriver. Je termine en vous remerciant sincèrement de votre écoute, puis pour vos dons, parce que c'est grâce à vous qu'on peut continuer à appuyer tout ce travail formidable qui se fait sur le terrain. Alors, je vous souhaite une belle journée de conférence. Merci beaucoup de m'avoir invité. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Merci beaucoup, Marilyn. C'est super inspirant d'entendre comment les organismes, les OBNL sont devenus ou sont demeurés parce qu'ils sont créatifs dans la pandémie. Puis je me permets peut-être de le dire à ceux qui, on parle de dons aujourd'hui, mais il y a aussi le bénévolat. Je pense que ta description prouve que s'il y a une activité que quelqu'un aime, il y a du bénévolat probablement, il y a un OBNL qui attend des bénévoles pour faire cette activité-là. Donc, n'hésitez pas d'aller consulter ça. Merci beaucoup.
Merci,
ta présentation fait une belle transition pour notre prochain panel, nos prochaines invités, Next Level. I'm happy to introduce our next segment, a partnership by Gameloft Montréal, Ludia Games, and Enix Montréal. Next Level shines a spotlight on the women behind video games in a number of roles, usually roles that tend not to be at the forefront of what people understand the games industry to be. From each of our partner studios, here is Next Level. During this segment, all of the donations will be donated to organizations supporting women, much like Marilyn just described. Please follow the link in the chat and give generously. And now join me in welcoming Jenny Mcvean. Jenny is Associate Director at Brighter, a market research agency specializing in gaming research. She works with a variety of companies in the gaming industry, helping to understand player experiences and perceptions across a range of platforms and titles. Alongside regular client work, she's also the driver of Brighter's Female Gamers Study, an independent annual study exploring gaming behaviors, as well as experiences of abuse and discrimination and perception of the industry. Take it away, Jenny.
Hi, thanks very much for the intro. Yeah, so the Female Gamers Study is what I'm going to be talking about today. I've got some slides to show you, which should come up shortly. There we go, the first one. So just a little bit of background, first of all, about this study. As Adrian said, my day-to-day work is normally with clients across the sector, helping them with new product development and player understanding. But as a kind of side project, I run the Female Gamers Study, which started 4 years ago. Just surveying UK female gamers, but we got some really interesting results. So we decided to expand that and include US female gamers as well. And then the next year we took a look at male gamers as well as the female gamers to compare the kind of experiences that they had, particularly around toxicity. And then this year we focused just on female gamers again, but included gamers from China as well. So the topics that we kind of covered was general behavioral and things around gaming. So what they like to play, why they like to play, how often they were playing, as well as looking at things like esports, streaming, toxicity, and some perceptions of the industry as well. Now, the reason why we decided to do this study, firstly, I think just a personal interest in gaming, working in it as well. We were quite interested to see the differences amongst females, but also because we were noticing that the face of gaming is changing. As you can see, that figure in the middle there, we're currently, it's around 47% of all gamers are female. And now thinking back, quite a few years ago in research, a lot of the time clients were asking us to only recruit male respondents, because that's what everyone thought the player base was. It was only males who were playing. But we started to see that shift, which is also reflected in that 47% there. And it's not just casual mobile games that females are playing. They're also playing some of these genres that were typically thought to be very male dominant. For example, shooters. That's a top five genre amongst females, with around 1 in 3 stating that as one of their favorite genres. However, there is a kind of reluctance amongst female gamers to actually identify as a gamer. So first of all, looking at some of the behavioral data that we have from our survey, on average, female gamers in the UK and the US are playing about 9 hours a week, which is quite a lot, more than I can manage most of the time. And that figure's even higher in China, so it's around about 12 hours. So they're playing quite a lot in a week. However, when we asked, would they call themselves a proper gamer, only 30% in the UK and the US said yes. So in China, they are a bit more likely to identify as a gamer, but yeah, particularly in the UK and US, there's a bit of reluctance there. Perhaps partly because of the stigma that the old idea of a gamer had, I guess. But also I think it's a feeling of not really being worthy of that title, especially when quite often female gamers get quizzed about how much they game, what games do you play, what's your ranking, what's your score. I feel that there's definitely some reluctance there to actually take that label and be like, yes, I am a gamer. So next up, looking at toxicity in gaming. So first of all, the top left box there, this is looking at the figure over time of those who've ever experienced abuse from male gamers, just UK and US. And as you can see, it has increased quite a lot over the last couple of years. So 2019, just 34% said that they had ever experienced abuse from male gamers, and that's almost doubled to 64% this year. Obviously, there are many factors that play into this. The fact that lockdown has probably meant there are more people playing online, people are more aware of toxicity and likely to call it out, but it's a general trend that we've been seeing, that the level of toxicity is increasing. And it's not just one-off experiences either. So around 1 in 3 said that they're experiencing toxicity regularly, mostly while they're playing online, but also on other online platforms, social media, even offline as well, sometimes while playing with friends offline or attending gaming related events as well. The types of toxicity that they're experiencing, we've pulled out the top 4 there at the bottom. So being aggressively quizzed about their experience or skill, particularly if they win a game or get a high score, get a higher ranking, that often leads to really aggressively being quizzed about how they did it. And I've heard examples of female gamers, their accounts being hacked into just in order for that person to prove that they were boosted or cheated. Next up is being sent inappropriate content, so being sent, for example, nude pictures or being asked to be sent them. Verbal abuse as well, and there's a real range in this category. We did ask in our survey for gamers if they were comfortable to give us some examples of some of the abuse they had experienced, and it's pretty shocking reading through it each year. We decided not to show any examples today because it's quite dark, but yeah, a real range from kind of the sexist stereotypes to really quite scary, dark verbal abuse as well. And then sexual harassment as well at 22%. Well, in terms of the kind of impact that this is having, over on the right there, so 1 in 5 say that this kind of toxic behavior makes them not want to play again. Of all of the female gamers we spoke to, over half feel that they'd have to practice before joining an online multiplayer through fear of this kind of toxic behavior if they didn't perform well enough, I guess. And then 14% just avoid multiplayers altogether because they're scared of these kind of reactions from other players, which is a real shame. It means we're losing some potential players that could be enjoying the games that are being made. And then even amongst those who are currently playing online multiplayers, 37% often don't reveal that they're female, so they purposely try and choose a name that is quite ambiguous or a character also that doesn't immediately show that they're female. And also the same percentage, 37% avoid speaking through fear of negative reactions. Quite often as soon as other players hear a female voice, the kind of toxic behavior starts. And I've heard examples of this actually from male gamers who their voice just happens to sound a bit feminine, and they've experienced toxicity because other players thought they were feminine and they've decided just to not use their in-game chat anymore, which is a real shame. And then in terms of how they feel about being supported with this kind of toxic behavior, only 30% feel that there are adequate processes in place to deal with this kind of toxicity. Of similar level say that there aren't any, but also really important, 32% don't know. So it could be that there is support for them, the tools that they could use, but they're not aware of it. So it's not much use either. Now that's obviously, that was focusing on players and toxicity while they're playing, but that's not where it ends, unfortunately. That there's toxicity throughout the industry. So that could be, you know, people working in the industry experiencing it from players who are sending them abusive messages through social media, or perhaps even sexism, discrimination, harassment within the workplace as well. There's obviously been a few articles online recently. And then looking at the kind of the workforce itself and the diversity. So there's some figures here from Statista from this year, showing the distribution of the gender of game developers worldwide. So we're still seeing a majority of males, although this has the female proportion has improved slightly over the last few years, but it's still only 30%, and 8% who identify in another way. But it's, I guess it's not surprising. It's one of the things that you know, a lot of people are trying to work on, diversifying the industry. But it's difficult when females, especially young females, when they're growing up and seeing this kind of toxic behavior, either while they're playing or, you know, articles in the news. It doesn't really act as a good way to encourage them to consider a career in the industry. And it's really important to have a diverse workforce, as you can see on the right there. Some more data from our survey looking at characters and the impact that it has there. Characters are really important in games, I'm sure you all know. If a player is really engaged with the character, they want to find out more about them, they'll keep on playing the game. But there are definitely some obstacles here in terms of the kind of depiction and perceptions of characters. So over half of our female gamers in the UK and the US feel that female characters are often over-sexualized, slightly less so in China, but still around half. And also around half feel that there aren't enough strong female characters. So we don't want to just see the kind of damsel in distress anymore. We want strong kind of leading characters who can hold their own, and are very endearing, kind of charismatic characters. And then lastly, sorry, just looking at what we can do as an industry about this. So unfortunately, there isn't one simple solution that will just fix things overnight. It's more of a case of working towards the long-term goal of a cultural shift. So there's several things that play into this, and it's also not the same for every single game. Different things work for different games. But first of all, I think looking at education, so teaching children in schools about gaming and acceptable behaviours, and you know, possibly running into toxicity. I've seen lots of examples of kids mimicking the behaviours that they see in online multiplayers. They see adults being toxic to other people. They think it's acceptable behaviour, and you know, kids learn a lot from what they see adults doing. So education early in schools is really important. And also providing resources for parents and teachers to help support with that as well. But also looking at the actual kind of players and educating them. So the kind of the so-called abusers. So not just slapping a ban on them and hoping they learn their lesson. It's about teaching them, you know, why they got that ban and how they can kind of become a better player. And then in terms of in-game kind of mechanics and tools, rewards for positivity. As I said, look, there are many different ways to do this, and sometimes it works for one game and not for others. But just kind of encouraging players to be positive to each other. Having clear reporting processes, clear warnings and consequences, so players know what they might receive a ban for example, and why that was. Encouraging self-regulating as well, self-moderating, encouraging players to call out other players who are being toxic to others. and just more moderation. It was a mix of human and moderation, and utilizing AI as well. And then the corporate responsibility. So having a real clear stand on your corporate position, again, saying, this is not acceptable behavior. That's not the kind of environment we want to create here. Having a really clear rule for social conduct, and making sure players are aware of that and read it and adhere to it as much as possible. Supporting staff as well, those who might be experiencing toxicity from other players, or even within the workplace as well. And giving praise to players and employees as well for positive behaviors and being positive influencers. But yeah, that was just a quick kind of snapshot of our survey. And now I'm going to pass the mic over to Amanda Farrow, who is the Next Levels moderator. And she is going to be discussing with our expert panelists about creating games for a female audience.
All right. Thank you so much, Jenny, for that insightful data. There was so much to unpack there, and you did a marvelous job walking us through. We look forward to catching up with you really soon on how things are going for women in the industry, and especially for women players. So, yay. All right, so before we dive into the panel, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Amanda Farrow. I currently live in the Metro New York area, but I was born and raised in British Columbia. So, proud Canadian over here. And I will be moderating this lovely panel of inspiring women. You may be familiar with some facet of my work, either as a writer. I've been at GamesBeat and the Washington Post, the ESRB. You cannot escape me. I'm everywhere. I'm a podcaster and analyst with the Virtual Economy podcast, where we discuss the business of making games. And I'm even a streamer. And you can find me on Twitch as Ready Player Mama. But you know what? Today is not about me. It's really not. It's about our panelists and, of course, all of you. So allow me to introduce you to our wonderful panelists today. First up, I have the inimitable Hilary Boarman, who is the lead animator on Jurassic World, the game with Ludia. She comes from a world of film and television and considers herself a neutral thespian perspective on games, where she spent the last near decade working in game studios. Good morning, actually almost good afternoon, and welcome, Hilary.
Good morning. Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
You're so very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Next up, we have the incredible Ashley Holman, who is the QA manager and director for Gameloft Montreal. She runs a small team of QA testers in Montreal, but also coordinates global teams working on said projects to ensure that the games are up to player standards and everyone has a great experience. Welcome to the second edition of Next Lev'Elles, Ashley.
Thanks, Amanda.
You're very welcome. Also, I really like the little heart on your shirt.
Oh,
That's really cute.
Thank you.
And finally, the magical Paula Neves. Paula is the senior product manager at Square Enix Montreal on the Space Invaders franchise. She's been working in UA for user acquisition, for 15 years, the last 8 years in the game industry. Paula's originally from Brazil, has been a gamer her whole life, and joined the game industry as her, quote, dream come true. Same. But her story actually starts in psychology. And don't worry, we will dig into that because I have so many questions. Good morning, and thank you for joining us, Paula.
Morning, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me.
This is shaping up to be an excellent conversation already. But my favorite part is talking about origin stories. And I ask every single person rather, that I interview to unravel their origin stories in the industry. So Hilary, I want to know more about you. After many years of working in entertainment, namely movies and TV, what brought you to games?
Well, actually, I just kind of fell into it because the industry is so large here in Montreal, and I'm coming from the West Coast as well, British Columbia girl. And then British Columbia, yeah, it's a big industry there in film and television. And I started in the mid 2000s at Mainframe Studio, working on a lot of the Mattel projects that they had there. And during a hiatus, deciding what I wanted to do, I decided to move across the country and see what the industry was like in Montreal, because I heard that there was a lot of good opportunities for someone with my experience out this way. And I also found that that working in games for someone as an artist, it opens up an opportunity to find a full-time position. A lot of the movies and industries are contractual, and you're considered, a contractor, and you have a time in which you end your contract. Whereas games, it takes a longer time to develop a certain game, depending on what you're working on. So you're not always worrying about the next contract. And
All right.
and yeah.
That's really cool. And honestly, the amount of times that I have heard, hey, I fell into the video game industry, I lost count like 10 years ago. It feels like everybody falls into this industry at some point or another. I want to know a little bit more about your role at Ludia, though. So for the animators and the artists listening in today, tell us a little bit more about your career and what led you to your role at Ludia, other than making lady dinosaurs in Jurassic World.
Well, I guess you could say I play with dolls for a living. I've always wanted to be an actress, and I've had my opportunities in high school, and I just always felt this crazy amount of stage fright. So it was always easier to just, be behind the camera and direct it. But what's fascinating to me is like the emotional response, the storytelling, the involvement, how it unravels. This is my my love is the storytelling, for sure, and using your body as an instrument.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing your origin story. I love these. Ashley, let's get to know you a little bit better. What brought you to gaming? And more specifically, what brought you to QA?
Good question. I'm actually about to up your falling into the industry count, because I have a similar story as Hillary also. I played games casually my whole life. I probably started playing games on the NES, maybe Super Mario Brothers or Duck Hunt with my dad growing up. I didn't really consider a career in gaming an option until I moved to Montreal from Ontario in 2012. I come from a background of mostly customer service, and in Montreal, you're really not able to excel in that industry if you aren't perfectly bilingual. So I had to start looking into other options. One day in 2014, I came across this ad on Craigslist that seemed really exciting about being a video game tester. So I answered the ad, did a couple interviews, was eventually hired at a different company. And then 8 years later, here I am today, still helping make some really awesome games and produce some really quality content in the gaming industry. And I'm loving it.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, because man, everybody falls into this industry, I swear. But let's talk a little bit about QA, because QA tends to be this misunderstood and sometimes even maligned role in games, but we know better. We know better in this conversation. But I'd love to know a little bit more about QA at Gameloft and your role in making sure that games can be the absolute best they can be.
Absolutely. And I agree, QA is often seen as people who just play games all day and don't. It's kind of just a job that people do to kind of fill the day. But honestly, my team works really hard, and they're the last line of defense before a game's released. Mm-hmm. So it's really up to us to make sure that all of these scenarios are fully covered, and that anything an end user will do, we've thought of that and we've tested that to make sure that the experience is really good for the end user. So to answer your question, the Montreal Gameloft scene, we're basically broken up into two parts. We have embedded QA testers who work closely with the dev team, and they're ingrained closely in the production team's day-to-day. So they're very agile and very technical oriented testers. And then we also work with other Gameloft teams in Ukraine and Eastern Europe and throughout the world, actually. And they do more structured tests for us in conjunction with our team. So I work kind of as an intermediary between our internal team in Montreal, the external teams globally, as well as the production teams in Montreal as well, to make sure that everybody's producing a great service and everybody's getting what they need and has the support they need. And that in the end, we produce a really awesome game for our fans.
It's an enormous undertaking. It really is. I love
Absolutely.
that. I love that that Gameloft has someone like you working at the head of QA. That's wonderful, genuinely.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Paula. Paula definitely fell into games. So Paula, the psychology to user acquisition is probably one of my all-time favorite lateral moves, and I have to know more. Tell me more.
Sure. First, I'd like to apologize for my voice. I have a cold. It's not
I'm
COVID.
sorry.
I did the test. It's not COVID. But yeah, I mean, I fell into games, even though like I was a gamer forever, you know, from the Atari onwards, I've always played games. But, you know, it's an industry that I'm from Brazil, like you said, and it's an industry that even though we have so many talented people and talented companies there,
Yeah.
it's tough in Brazil. So I've never imagined I would work with games. So I was supposed to do like college abroad, and that didn't happen, sort of like out of the blue. I saw myself sort of stuck and not knowing what to do. And, you know, I loved science, I loved people, I loved, you know, just pretty much everything. I was a nerd in school. And I thought psychology would be a good, you know, a good subject that would entail like the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was supposed to be a pre-med student abroad, actually. So
Oh,
yeah, that was weird. But so I went into psychology, and you know, it's a 5-year course in Brazil. And by the end of it, I was like, okay, this is fun. You know, it's a major everyone should do, but you know, working with this is not for me. I had a few patients, and I was like, okay, this is not for me. And then as a next step, I'm very passionate about stuff. So I was like, okay, maybe marketing would do me good. So I did a postgraduate in marketing. And I didn't start my career in gaming until a bit later, in a small company called Nano Games in Brazil. And I was invited to be their marketing coordinator and started doing a lot of UA, a lot of work with influencers and so on. But my major actually went into full like, you know, fluency when I went into free-to-play games. You know, I never would have imagined as a psychologist I would use so much of my major in psychology working in games. So when I started, and yet when I started working in free-to-play games, mobile games, like 8 years ago now, it was like a perfect fit, you know, for my major, and it has a lot more in common than I thought it would in the beginning. But yeah, today I don't even have my little Freud dolls anymore in the house. Like I completely forgot about my past, but I still use psychology daily, you know.
That's absolutely incredible. And I want to dig a little bit more into user acquisition because it's such a fascinating, and especially in mobile and free to play, it's a daunting and deeply important job. So how would you describe your work to someone looking maybe to get into user acquisition?
So yeah, in mobile, like our studio at Square Enix Montreal, we make mobile games. And for mobile free-to-play games, UA is essential, is core to everything. You know, it's one of the core areas, like QA, for instance, is a core area. UA is also very core because we are sort of the gatekeepers in a way, right? We are the ones controlling who's doing what, who's coming in, you know, what the flow of the game is in terms of the users that are coming in. But also we are key to the process of launching a game, right? So if you're free to play game, it's such a, mobile games today, it's such a heated market, you know, that if you don't have marketability, you really can't scale your game. And how do you measure marketability? UA is there to help from the pre-concept phase through to tech launch, soft launch. It's through UA that you sort of like green light your game if it's scalable enough, if it's marketable enough. So it is essentially a key area, and it's really, really exciting to do UA for mobile games. It's complex, but I like to say that the UA peeps working in gaming, they learn like so fast, and they're really, really good at what they do, because it's just so heated as a market and so complex.
Absolutely. And it's changing all the time. It is a constant, well, I mean, gaming in general, as we all know, is this constantly moving target. But we are here to celebrate the incredible contributions that women like the women on our panel continue to make in the game industry. And while things get better bit by bit, year after year, we still have a long way to go to reach true equity. So we're going to dive in to get our panelists' perspectives on where we are and where we're going within studio and game development culture. So Paula, I'm actually going to tap you to continue our conversation, because I think this is a good introduction to the rest of what we're going to be talking about. So I'd love your perspective as somebody working in user acquisition. According to a joint study conducted by Newzoo and Facebook in 2020, women comprise 48% of mobile players. Overall, from your perspective, how has this affected the way user acquisition and marketing has engaged with the marketplace as a result?
Yeah, so I mean, the same study cites that, 65% of women play games globally, right? So we really have to break the stereotype of like the man cave gamers,
Yes.
That's not a thing.
No, it's really not.
Yeah. You can't see my background, but it's sort of the same. But yeah, so I mean, we have to break that stereotype. And if we talk about like the history of programming in gaming, women had really important roles. So like Ada Lovelace is considered the first programmer ever. She was a girl,
Yes.
We have big names like Carol Shaw, from Atari,
Of course.
making games by herself. A game that I played quite a bit, River Raid. But it's crazy how like today we have to say, girls play games with all this history. But we still unfortunately have to do that job. So in terms of UA, we try to do, just through representation, having our assets have women, when we have an asset that actually shows a human being, we have women up there as well, playing. But actually, as a trend, the messaging is also a bit different from women to men, but not in the stereotypical way you would think. Like, let's be gentle. Let's not talk competition because this is a female.
We can only handle soft, gentle things.
Yeah. So I mean, there are women that love competition that are really competitive.
It's true.
So it's hard not to fall into this the stereotypical approach in UA. And what I really like now with what we're living today in society with gender fluidity and all, the trend is to actually do more of like gender neutral ads to encompass where we're going as a society. Fabulous. Which is awesome. So yeah, I hope that answered your question a bit.
I think it does. Yeah, I think it does. It's a very complex question, and we could sit here all day and pick apart the answer, quite frankly.
Yeah.
But I want to move on, and I want to ask Ashley this question. From your perspective, what are some things that are important when designing a game appealing to women players?
Absolutely. And I think like Paula even touched on that a little bit just now, saying that it's important to have that like gender neutrality in the marketing. I think that's really important. I think it's really important to take an approach when you're designing a game. And I'm not a game designer, but from my perspective, I feel that just focusing on the overall accessibility and making the games more accessible to everyone versus certain demographics is really important. Gameloft has done a lot of really good job of approaching this subject over the last couple of years internally. We've had some really great in-house lectures. We have a program called Gameloft Classes. So we invite lecturers to talk to us about different subjects. And we've talked about this a few times in a couple different subjects about being able to express your gender through different types of clothing, not necessarily towards a specific gender, just being able to wear whatever you want. Just having balancing and inclusivity and watching for stereotyping, I think, is also important. And also just being more accessible in all aspects of the game. So UI, you could focus on making sure that the game is also more accessible to those like with color blindness and things like that. So I think that those are just some things that are better to make things more accessible to all.
And we love that. This is, I mean, we're here to celebrate women in the industry, but let's be real, all are welcome.
Absolutely.
all genders, all marginalized genders, and all genders in general are welcome. I love that. So thank you so much for that perspective. And regardless of whether or not you think you make games, you do make games. Games would not get made without you. Not at all.
Thank you.
All right, Hillary, this one's for you. And I'm genuinely interested in your perspective on this one because this is about representation. So from your perspective, especially as an animator, how do you feel about stereotypes? Because we're talking about stereotypes today. So in terms of representation, are we moving away from them? And what do things look like from behind the scenes as an artist and an animator?
Okay, so because I'm not technically a gamer, and I do.
No, you are a neutral thespian.
Exactly. I'm more. My perspective comes more from working inside the studio with other artists and other teammates, and so I feel like the story is what's important in when it comes to relation to what I do and what I can contribute. And I feel like there are more women characters that aren't just there. You know, a long time ago, I was always working with Barbie, right? And they were always like, Barbie's always got to be perfect. She cannot be too mad. She cannot be too upset. She can't be aggressive. And she can't be in any way challenged by a situation. She will always come out on top. But when I was working in there, I always found that my most interesting character was the villain. And the villain was always someone who was powerful and could exert themselves over the situation and then would lead the story in a certain direction. But I could never find, as I moved through the industry, that this power dynamic was the same for protagonist female characters. A lot of times they were always in the background, but they were always specifically animated in a very feminine way, and that their response to a situation was always kind of secondary. But later on, as time goes on, I'm always finding new stories. And as you say, like you have your cave behind you with all the gamers. Mine is a comic book collection. I collect stories. And as I go through this decade, I'm seeing a huge like switch towards portraying women in a more powerful role. They have a more interesting story dynamic, and that they also oftentimes lead the direction to a place where more other females get involved. And within the story, they are regarded as someone to look up to by the other male characters, which, you know, if I were like, I'm coming from a generation where, you know, I was definitely stereotyped and told that I would like to have the new Rainbow Bright doll or the new Care Bear doll, but never would I want a Nintendo Game Boy. Well, you know, but these women are picking up swords and they're running towards the problem and they're finding solutions. And this wasn't always something that was written about or as a storyline. And I feel like it's more accepted nowadays. And as a collector of stories, I find that it is also shifting within the studio too. Especially,
that's great.
Yeah, I hate to say that the #MeToo was definitely a pivotal moment inside the studio. Women they were suddenly being noticed and being pulled into the conversation. And I was really grateful for that to happen, because I always felt that before that, there was a lot of boys clubs within a studio. And
Sure. And we're still reckoning with that.
We're still reckoning with that, but it's definitely changing. I feel it's changing, slow and steady, but it's definitely changing. I hope
bit by bit, year by year. Yeah, that was great. I really appreciate that. And I love that you describe yourself as a collector of stories. You guys can't see the other side of my office, but it is comics and books, and it's just this office is really full of stuff, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so this is a question for all of you. So I will start with Paula on this one. So how can we battle gender bias within games themselves? Paula, what's your perspective on this to begin with?
Yeah, I think we need just more representation, which is happening. I mean, we see more and more games, you know, with badass female characters. For me, that's really, really a big one. But not necessarily making it in your face, like this, dangling the fact that it's a woman character.
Right.
Just make it a woman character. Don't make a big deal out of it. She will be whatever she needs to be.
Just let her exist.
Just let her exist. For me, that goes a long way. Me as a player, when I see a new game announced and it has a female character, literally, it doesn't matter like the genre, because I play everything. I'm like, okay, I want to play that just because.
You and me both.
Yeah. So for me, it's majorly about that, you know. And we see already an improvement in that sense, and like the characters becoming more and more, you know, just badass and like non-objectifiable. There used to be a website, I think it was called like Where's My Armor or something, that it was just a collection of female characters that were like fighters, and they were wearing bikinis and stuff, you know. And it's like, how do you fight in that, right?
And how does one fight in heels? In addition to that,
I can barely walk in heels, so so I see less and less of that.
Yeah.
So I'm happy. I think we're in a good path.
All right, I like that. Better armor. Better armor is definitely a step in the right direction. Ashley, from your perspective, how can we battle gender bias within games?
Absolutely. I think this is a really big question, and I'll have like maybe a couple different avenues to tackle here. But I think something that is really important first and foremost is to have more female streamers in the forefront. I'd like to see you're like, yeah. I'd like to see gaming companies partner more with female streamers, and maybe even set a threshold for the expectation of male to female ratio in streamers that they're partnering with. I think that will help garner a lot of additional visibility to women in games, and just let young girls and women know, yet this is an opportunity for them, and this is an avenue that they can go down. At like a regulation level, for QA, we already do certain checks to make sure that there aren't certain things, like certain offensive things in games, for instance, racism. We could integrate gender bias and inclusivity into those checks. This could be done, yeah, this could be done through first party platforms. So like Sony and Microsoft could set an expectation and hold developers to that expectation. And it can also be done at the studio level. So my QA team, for instance, can verify these things and make sure to flag if, hey, this seems a little bit biased, this seems a little bit stereotypical, maybe we should move in this direction. Because I feel like if all these teams work together in supporting games that are more conscientious, we can work towards the goal of not having panels like this, because this isn't a discussion anymore. And that's the goal of Next Lev'Elles, is just to move to inclusivity and equality for all, I think.
Absolutely. I would love for these kinds of conversations to just be entirely obsolete, so we can move on to talking about other things like psychology and you know, and QA. And I could listen to Hillary talk about, you know, her thespian perspective all day, every day. So speaking of Hillary, what's your perspective on this? How can we battle gender bias in games?
Okay.
Just a small question. Very tiny.
It's a lot to unpack there. Well, because like generally I just play the mobile games and it's usually on my downtime, which isn't a lot because I'm a mom and I'm also working very hard. So I'm not really sure I am the best person to answer this question.
That's okay. That's okay. I value your perspective. Paula, do you have more you'd like to say?
Yeah, one thing I would want to add that we didn't mention, which is really important since we're talking about like studios and development.
Yes.
We need to hire more women.
Yes.
That's it. You know, the fact that I talked about characters being less and less objectifiable, it's probably there are women in the art team, there are women in the design team, you know, helping just giving people a north, right? And it's not just sit back as a company and wait for women to send in their resume. You have to go out there, participate in events like this, sponsor stuff as a company to attract more women, right? Because today, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of women graduating, especially from like the programming majors, you know, and that changed in 1984, actually. Before that, women, like it was almost equal, you know, women to men in programming, you know. Back in 84, like 37% of women, 37% of people graduating in computer sciences were women, right? And that shifted radically when the personal computer started being marketed as a toy for men. And then women started seeing less and less of a representation and not doing, you know, that as a major. So we have to go out there as companies and tell women that, you know, it's okay, come join us, you'll have fun, you know.
I would like to add to that. In fact, I did think of something.
Please do.
So yes, I agree with her 100%. There needs to be more women developers, more women working in the studios, but not just this, more women leading the teams.
Yes.
Now, I'm in my studio, the each project is broken up into teams and it's led by a certain person who's an expert in that field. And I find sometimes, and I've worked at many studios, when there is an overabundance of men, they tend to push and get together like a team and push the younger men. And the younger men gain confidence, even if they're not ready, to move into a leadership position because they feel like their friends and their bros support them and have confidence in them. And then they move toward that. Where women, they're less likely to stand up and be like saying, I'm ready, even when they are. And even when they have more experience and more time, they tend to be more critical of their own knowledge and their own abilities and their own experience. And sometimes they just sit back and accept the new lead or whatever, just because the majority is supporting that person. Now, a lot of times, I feel like women should be more supportive of other women in leadership roles. Now, if it works on the other side of the gender gap, then maybe it should work for us. You know, we should bond together and in
more
studios
mentorship,
and push each other towards the goals that we feel we deserve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And diversity, equity, and inclusion can't exist without all three of those pieces, right? And the inclusion portion of this is in ensuring that women are included, that people of color, that other marginalized genders are not just included in the conversation, but have seats at the table.
Exactly.
I love that. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think that is an exceptionally important perspective. So I'm glad you chimed back in.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the next segment of our conversation. Women have been playing video games for much longer than we've been acknowledged, as we have just discussed, both by other players and by the industry at large. It's something that many of us have fought to overcome for, gosh, a long time. So let's discuss some of the biggest issues that women as players are facing. And these questions are going to be for all of you. So I'm going to start with Ashley, actually. Ashley, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about women playing video games? Like we just talked about, you know, one of the big ones is, oh, women only like soft games. They don't like to be competitive. What other misconceptions can you think of?
Absolutely. I think that that is a big misconception that women only want to play like the Princess Sparkle Pony whatever game. And I think that's really untrue, because I think one of the things that Jenny said in her presentation was one of the top genre among women is shooters,
Heck
which was exciting and surprising for me. That was a statistic that I just wasn't aware of, and that's really cool to know. And I'd love to see more female representation in shooters. And
I would too.
I think, as she also mentioned, just the barrier of women being more hesitant to use their mics in multiplayer games and things like that really help or really hinder the representation of women in games like that. So I think just like opening up the floor and making women a more comfortable environment for women to speak their mind and be able to represent themselves in a game would really help perpetuate women playing other genres, or perpetuate the visibility of women playing in these genres. I think another important thing that is a major hindrance in women, or another thing that's misrepresented in women playing games. Yeah, it's a bit of an early morning for me today. It's only noon.
Can we trade? Because I would love that. That sounds great.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so I think I lost my train of thought, but I think something also that is misconstrued and that I've seen in the past is a lot of women think that games are for boys. I've heard a lot of women say like, oh, that's my boyfriend's thing or my husband's thing. And that's something that I think that we really need to like nip in the bud and let women know that no, games are fun. You can play games. You're allowed to play games.
I wish I would have had more of that reinforcement outside of my family when I was young, because I was the only female gamer that I knew. And I grew up in a household of gamers, but that was my dad and my brother.
And I'm sure like outside of your family unit, you also encountered some of the issues that Jenny mentioned earlier, where you felt the need to prove yourself to people when you said you were a gamer. So I think that's another big hindrance in women identifying as hardcore gamers.
It's true. It's absolutely true. I definitely don't identify as any core. I just show up and play video games from time to time when I have the time. So Hillary, I know as our outside thespian perspective that you do not play games on the regular, but
I probably would have.
Have you been encouraged to?
Had I been encouraged to, yes.
I would have loved that for you, because there are lots of games from like our shared generation
and
that would have been
never
just
let
great.
Me play.
Oh, that's ridiculous. I would have just taken the controller away, quite frankly. But from your perspective, I would love to know what are some other big misconceptions that people have about women playing games?
I do think though, I don't know about your personal experience or whatever, but I think the interest must be planted young, and to be able to be like, as a mother, if I had my son and my daughter playing and my son was like, no, you can't play this because you're a girl or whatever, I would immediately step in and I would support and explain and try and nurture the cooperation between the two. And it's paramount. It's important, because when you're young and you're told that you're a certain way because you're a certain gender, you tend to believe it.
Yeah. Because you don't know any different, right?
Yeah,
you're just listening to the people around you and soaking up the world.
And if you're the rare one who has a Teflon shield, and just says, I'm going to do it anyway, good for you. Grow that shield. And I'm talking to you because you started young, right? And you said you had a brother. I'm sure that he didn't want you to play at some point, right?
That is not the case. My little brother was shockingly, because he's younger than me by 2 years.
Wonderful. That's wonderful.
So he would often follow my lead when it came to games. My brother's still my best friend. I'm a total dork like that.
Yeah, that's great, man. I can see that but like when I'm talking back in the early 90s when
Oh yeah.
you know, consoles were sacred and you don't dare touch them. If it belonged to someone else, you have to ask permission or whatnot. But now that there's so many ways to play games, and there's so accessible to everyone. And if you're a parent and you find that, you know, your child, female or male, has taken an interest, support that interest. Tell them they can do whatever they want, you know, encourage them and give them more opportunities to be exposed to the things that they like. I know in some cases it involves money, but most of the time it just involves time and a conversation.
Oh, I love that. It starts young. It really, really does. If I didn't start young, I don't know if I would have started at all. So, and I was really fortunate. So Paula, we are going to end with your perspective on this. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about women playing video games?
Yeah, I think the girls covered it pretty well up until now. Like, I would just like to say that, you know, I was the one with the shield as well, in not only with gaming, but with like I was a semi-professional soccer player in Brazil until I was like 20 something. And
that's incredible. How do you keep getting more incredible? I don't even.
No, I had to like do weird stuff to like be able to play. My dad didn't want me to play, you know, like machismo was a big thing in Brazil. He would put my sister to watch me during like playground hours in school, so I wouldn't play with the boys, you know, and slowly I misconstrued that, you know, and he became my biggest fan and he was so proud of me. Yeah, but it took, you know, and
we love a redemption arc for dads.
Yeah, you know, he's a great guy, but you know, it's just the way a 70-something-year-old would think in Brazil.
Sure.
Same thing for games. Like, maybe it was easier for me having an older sister, like being a household of women. She got the Atari as a gift and she didn't really like it, and I picked it up, you know, and played it. So that really helped. But when I like, I was the only girl in the LAN houses playing Counter-Strike. I don't know if LAN houses were a thing, but in Brazil they were a thing.
They're definitely a thing in Canada too.
And you can imagine the sort of things I heard, you know, being the only girl there, and I have to be honest, being pretty good at it at that time.
Heck yeah, you were.
So, you know, it's tough. You hear a lot of stuff and you want to give up, but I'm a passionate person, so I just kept going, but it's tough.
Perseverance is sadly a prerequisite.
Yeah, and now, you know, as like you know, Hillary said, as a mom of a 8-month-old little girl, I'm just so like much. Yeah, she's the cutest. I'm just ready to like help her kick ass, you know.
Absolutely. That is like the 3 mama bears in here. That's what we do. Got to make sure that our kids kick all the booty. Oh my goodness, we only have 20 minutes left. I have to like zoom through the rest of our questions. Gosh, we have so many questions. All right. Let's choose one more from this section. All right, here we go. In 2020, 18% of games launched featuring female characters. What can game developers do to better connect with women players? And how important are female characters to connect with women players? And I'd actually like Hillary's perspective on this first. As a game maker, my friend.
Well, as a game maker, we take a lot of opportunities to include the fans and their requests in our day-to-day production. We have Facebook page, we have forums. We make sure that everyone on the team has access to these comments and that we can see exactly what they love or hate about the game, whether you're a male or female. Most of it's actually equal between the two genders in that, and that they come together in a decision. If they want to make a community request for a specific kind of hybrid dinosaur, we listen and we try our best to create that for them. A lot of times people don't realize that all of our dinosaurs are female.
I love that so much.
Yeah, they're just a great representation of how you know, I think most games should be inclusive when it comes to the fans being a part of the decisions that we make in general when it comes to, because as you know, Jurassic Park is about creating hybrid creatures, right? And we get a lot of people coming to us with opinions on, oh, we should make this dinosaur with this dinosaur, we'll make an epic dinosaur. And we're like, always loving these conversations, which can create all kinds of new conversations about potential dinosaurs in the future. I mean, we're listening, we're watching, we're always making sure that we're including the comments and opinions of the fans, whether they're male or female.
I like that. And I think that that's fantastic. I love the lady dinosaurs. It just makes me so happy. Just girl dinosaurs all the time. Paula, I want to shoot this one to you next. What can game developers do to better connect with women players, and how important are female characters to connect with women players?
Yeah, so like I said before, at least from my personal experience, having female characters is super important. Just having representation, not only women characters, women of color characters, you know, we need more of those.
So many more of those.
Really a lot more. Women, LGBT, you know, the list is long. But I think that, you know, Hillary touched an important point there with the community and being able to hear the community and give a voice to your female community as well. That's really, really important. So yeah, I think that's sort of like the main point. But you know, again, hire women, hire women, you know,
and support them.
And support them. And a lot of companies will look and just at the numbers and say, oh, but we have 40% women in our company, which is considered good. But then when you look at them and their positions, they're not in leadership positions, they're not in programming positions. You know, it's not good enough to say we have X%. You have to encourage them to move up the ladder. You have to put them in places where it's just men, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of sums it up for me.
I like that. Thank you so much, Paula. All right. And Ashley, I want your perspective on this as a longtime gamer.
I'm still thinking about epic dinosaurs. I'm sorry.
Right? That's all I can think about right now is I just want dinosaurs. I might have to go and play that after we're done today.
Absolutely. So from my perspective, I think something that's really important with connecting with women players and just better representing them and listening to them is just giving them the option to choose what they want and voice their opinions. Not all women want to play female characters and not all men want to play male characters. So I think it's very important to give the user the choice to do what they want and also give them the creativity to make their character their own. I think that's a really great way to connect with everybody, especially female characters. You're not pigeonholed into like being, you know, a stereotypical female character. You can build the character you want to be. And that'll really help you attach yourself to the character and enjoy the game a lot more. So I think it's a win-win-win situation for everybody involved. So also to answer your question, I think it's really not as important to have women characters, but also just the choice. But as Paula and Hillary touched on, it's very important to have just a representation of women characters and female characters in game, and also obviously people of color as well. As well, playable and non-playable characters. I think that's very important.
Better representation all the way around. Gosh, that'll be a beautiful day. Be such a beautiful day when we finally reach that point. Thank you so much for your perspective. So we're going to move on to our next section. My goodness, we have 2 sections left in only 15 minutes. What is happening? Let's talk about marketing. And we're going to try to go fast. So marketing to women isn't about stereotypes, as we have definitely discussed. It's about holistic, inclusive experiences where women feel valued, right? And there's a lot more to consider within that framework than just the idea of women playing games as well. So I want to start with Paula on this one. So Paula, from your perspective, when you think about marketing, right? Because you work in user acquisition, so you're working in marketing. How do you want a game to be marketed to you?
Yeah, so for me, it's I don't like it when I can sense that the message was stereotypically tailored for me as a woman. I hate that.
Checkbox diversity.
Yeah, because I was playing Counter-Strike, I was playing 007 GoldenEye, I was like shooting and killing people, and so
flappers only.
So if they do like, so that sort of marketing not only doesn't speak to me, but it hurts me as a woman, because there's so many women out there like me. So again, representation, be there. If your game is a shooter, have women on the assets, because like we said before, and like Jenny said in her presentation, we have women, a lot of women playing shooters. So have that there, and don't curb your message because it has to be soft. I remember in the 90s growing up, the whole playing with power that Nintendo
now you're playing with power. Yeah,
was pushing through. For me, that was so awesome. I was yeah, I'm playing with power. But then you look at the actors; they're mostly boys, right?
Yeah.
So at the same time, the messaging spoke to me, but it was tailored clearly for boys.
The 90s was a lot like that, quite frankly. The 90s and the aughts, things were messy.
So it's just have the thought of having representation no matter your game genre, because you will have women playing no matter what your game is about.
Yeah. I think that's great. Hillary, I know that even though you are outside thespian perspective, if you were designing, I'm going to do this from the inside instead. If you were designing a marketing campaign, how would you want to market a game so that women especially felt seen and included?
Okay. Okay, so I started my career working for Barbie.
I love that, though.
In the other studio, they were making Action Man, which was a stunt man. Every time they started a new episode, I wanted to be on that show. They're like, no, you should stick to Barbie. Why?
Aw, boo.
Oh, because. And I'm like, what does that mean? And so I'm going to take this as how do you market to women to work on your project kind of question.
Sure. Let's check that out. Sure.
So as you know, today I work on a game about dinosaurs that is actually quite educational and as an implement of fantasy, because you can create your own dinosaur, right? So I want something that's going to push me in a direction where I can learn something about something, like I want to expand my knowledge base. I want to one day be able to participate on the holodeck of Star Trek. I don't know. Like, I imagine this time in my life, there would be an AR program where I could go and just be whoever I want in some kind of 3D realm, like I know that that's in the future, right? And who wouldn't want this, but I really find that if you want to attract more females to your project, especially ones that you feel have the ability to be able to lead a team, the project itself needs to be something that they can take and use as either an educational tool for their children, because most of the time women are nurturers in their own right, and that they want to make something of their time because we have so little of it. Like, let's do something that's worthwhile, that's going to teach us something, that's going to show us something new, not just doing the same things all the time. Sure, there's a lot of action, there's a lot of explosions, there's a beautiful environment, right? But what am I learning?
Right. No, I like that. And I think that that's an excellent outside thespian perspective.
Thank you.
Goodness gracious, my ADD is acting up today. Ashley, did I ask you this question?
No, you didn't.
Okay, I'm going to ask you this question now. How do you want
right.
games to be marketed to you? My apologies.
No worries. Absolutely. When I was younger, I was really into action adventure games, so things like God of War, Assassin's Creed. And I really loved Heavenly Sword. When it came out, I was like,
Nariko?
heck yes.
Hello.
Heck yes.
I'm not a player, but I
God
love
of
that
War.
game.
Let's do this. But I was really turned off by like the over sexualization of the protagonists of the story. So I think I was still really into the game, but I would have loved to see more of a less sexualized version of the character. I think that would have like made me a fangirl and hopefully maybe franchise the game. Because it was really sad when I did not see any sequels because I was hoping for it.
It's so weird that you brought up Heavenly Sword. I was legit just thinking about Heavenly Sword like 2 weeks ago, thinking about
Such a good
Nariko.
game.
And I was just like, why didn't we ever see her come back? She was great.
It was
and
a
that
great
was a
game,
billion
yeah.
years ago in game years.
Absolutely. I think it was one of the first games that like really utilized the 6-axis controller too for the bow and arrow. Anyways,
it was wild. No, we could talk about this all day. We won't.
No, but that reminded me of GTA series, right? I mean, I'm a huge fan of the series. And back when I had time, I like to be a completionist and do 100% in these games. And I remember at some point GTA 4, I think, to get all the outfits and stuff, you needed to like engage with prostitutes and things like that. And it just made me feel so bad. Like I hated that so much.
Right.
I ended up not completing the game because it just made me feel super bad. So
well, and that's certainly an element of inclusivity that has been sorely lacking. And it gets obviously it's been getting better, but we still have a long way to go. My goodness, I have so many other questions to ask you all. So we're going to move on to our final section. I had a bunch of other questions I wanted to ask, but we're running out of time. So let's look towards the future. Women and non-men, frankly, aren't going anywhere, both as players and as game makers. So let's wrap up our conversation and discuss what the future might hold for women in gaming. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm not going to ask you all of these questions. I'm just going to ask you individually the last sets of questions here. I have 3 more questions. So I am going to start off with Paula on this one, and we're going to talk about socialization, relatability, and customization as being particularly important to women. And how will that impact the development of future games and said features? From your perspective, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a non-issue when you're talking about like, if you're making a casual mobile game, for instance, you have to appeal to as many people as possible, right?
Right.
So you are
gender neutral UA.
Yeah, gender neutral UA. You are looking for all sorts of different features in the game because you have to. It's a casual game. You need those daily active users to be high.
Engagement is king and queen.
So yeah, for sure. But when we talk about more hardcore games, the triple X sort of games, sometimes they really focus on the stereotypical hardcore men sort of approach.
Sure.
And if your game is hardcore and is niche, I'm a business person. You can't really afford to be the niche of the niche. Like I'm gonna
be leaving money on the table.
And I'm just gonna, this is the game for men. And UA wise, there are like some really weird UA assets out there just because they serve as clickbaits.
Yeah.
They are, a lot of. We've all
seen those.
We've all seen those, and there are games that have that, and they are games that if you look at like App Annie and so on, you see it's like mostly women that play the games, like the story games. Interactive story games, and they have the weirdest, like offensive sort of ads just because it's going to bring your CPI down, right?
Yeah.
And us as a company, we don't do that. Like we would never. So I think that's one step that also on the UA front, you need to really be vigilant about. And in the game side, yes, the features that you mentioned, they do have a larger appeal to women. So, you know, even if you're making a hardcore XXX game, think about the socialization features you're going to put in the game, because they're not going to appeal only to women.
No.
You know, and the best thing you can do for your business is have people interacting in a game, and then inviting other people to come in, and all those sorts of viral features, right, for your game.
Absolutely.
So yeah, hopefully that answers the question, because we are out of time.
It does absolutely answer the questions. I wish I had another hour with you all, but that's just me being a little greedy. So Ashley, how can we encourage more women to join the game industry?
Oh, I could go on for days about this.
Oh, I know you could.
I know we're short on time, so I'm going to try and keep it to a couple.
Keep it to the
TLDR.
Things.
Yes, TLDR. Okay, so events like this are a great way of ushering in the next generation of women and showcasing the talent that we already have in the industry. So I think that's something really important. Also, continuing to give the space and make space for women and minorities to speak about what they want in the industry and hold companies to a high expectation. There's been a lot of people coming to the forefront in the past years about how women and minorities have been treated in the industry.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important that we take the time to listen to these people and grow from these experiences, because these are the people that are representing the current women in the industry and minorities in the industry. So
Yes.
If we want to appeal to more, we need to listen to our current teams. And then finally, I've seen a lot of different industries offer free or reduced tuition to women in order to encourage enrollment in schools. So I think that's something that could also help encourage women to participate a little bit more in the gaming industry.
I love that. That's fantastic. And quite frankly, in Canada, we can totally do that.
Absolutely.
So the government needs to get on it.
Yes.
And finally, Hillary, my dear, how can game development studios be more welcoming to women? So just a very short snippet, because we could talk about this all day.
Okay, so we're at a very pivotal moment in the growth of video games as you know, in general as a business. So we need to definitely start young. You know, if you have a young daughter or a young lady in your life who is desperate for some mentorship, call me. You know, I know so many women in this industry, who are the only lead of the lighting department at a certain
Sure.
studio, and they have so much information to share. But I think they would rather nurture someone who's young and has the fire that wants that knowledge, you know, and then help guide that young person towards a goal or a decision, a pivotal decision in their life. Definitely expose them more to the language of technology, you know, trying to get not just artists, but technologically inclined. It's a new language. We need to teach this language young, you know, and have them build that confidence as a young person to know that when they get to a certain age and they know what they want, that they have that substance and they have the guidance there, you know. Yes, I would love to take on a protege or someone and push them towards the goals that they want for themselves. And you can, you know, make a change, a small change here and a small change there for someone, you know, it can spread like wildfire.
Oh, it really can. What a great note to end this wonderful conversation on. We actually do have questions in the chat, and we have zero time to answer them. So I can't speak for the panelists as to whether or not they'll be able to answer those questions in the chat, but if they have time, I'm sure that they would, I'll answer them myself in addition to that. But thank you all so much for joining us here today. An enormous shout out to each of our beautiful panelists, Hillary, Ashley, and Paula, for being so incredible today. It's been such a pleasure to be surrounded by such talented and excellent women in this industry, let alone have the opportunity to sit down and interview you all. So thank you so much for this. And I want to thank our organizers for Next Lev'Elles, because they're amazing. Nejma, Genevieve, and Junelle for ensuring that this event exists at all. The Next Lev'Elles event exists at all. Without the dynamic trio, we'd all be lost. And I hope that you all enjoyed your time with us today. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was so interesting. As a CTO in video games, I felt a lot of what you described in this panel, and thank you, Amanda, for leading the conversation. It was really, really interesting.
It was my pleasure.
Merci tout le monde. Merci d'avoir été là pour notre avant-midi. On vous rappelle qu'il y a un encan silencieux en cours. Il y a des lots quand même très intéressants. Vous allez trouver des statuettes dedans d'Assassin's Creed, Far Cry. Il y a des manettes de jeu exclusives Xbox. Il y a même une guitare électrique que j'ai eu le temps de regarder. Puis il y a Raina qui a fait des bijoux. Donc, c'est une des artistes d'un de nos studios qui a fait des bijoux qui sont dans les lots. Donc, n'hésitez pas à aller consulter le lien qui va être dans le chat pour l'encan silencieux. De mon côté, on se retrouve cet après-midi. On prend une pause d'1 heure pour aller dîner, se dégourdir les jambes. On se retrouve pour le premier panel technique avec moi, donc avec les 3 personnes qu'on a pour tout ce qui est UGC, donc User Generated Content et outils de communauté. Martin Talbot de chez Frima, Martin Ruel de Square et Benoît Beauséjour de chez Turbulent vont nous rejoindre après le lunch. À tantôt tout le monde.